Costa Rica, welcome to our live Friday Costa Rica real estate broadcast. My name is Matt Rosensteel, aka Costa Rica Matt. Today, we're going to be talking about what happens to Guanacaste real estate during economic crises. There are some substantial differences between what happens in our real estate market down here and what's going to happen or what could happen in the US, Canada, etc. during those same crises. And I want to give you an overview of why things are different, what actually happens, and how you, as a prospective buyer or seller of Costa Rica real estate, can play things during a crisis to your advantage. If you want to get directly in touch with me, you can always email me at matt@costaricamatt.com. It'll be a pleasure to help you. I am a Guanacaste real estate broker, so if you're interested in other parts of the country, I would be connecting you with a professional, a referral to help you out. I also wanted to mention that if you're looking for the world's best video manual for Costa Rica real estate, you should log on to CostaRicaMatt.com and check out my V-Book, which is a video collection of the most important Costa Rica real estate information that you'll need in researching, learning about the market, and navigating the complicated process of buying or selling here in Costa Rica. First of all, before we get started here today, folks, I want to issue the disclaimer that excuse me, I in no way want to comment on the possibility of an economic crisis, whether we're facing one, whether there will be one, etc. I have absolutely no political opinion whatsoever, and I'm certainly not going to express anything close to a political opinion online these days, because nothing is a faster recipe to lose your peace and quiet than doing something like that. Before we get started, I also wanted to give a huge shout out to some very important clients, Peter and Diana. I'm really looking forward to having you guys here in Junquillal more regularly. But here's a quick toast to all of my clients, the people who call me up and decide to use me as their realtor. Thank you very much for helping me put food on the table for my family, and cheers with this tiny cup of water. It's like I'm at the dentist and I'm about to swirl and spit out whatever treatment they had just given me. Without further ado, folks, let's start talking about our topic of the day here and looking at Guanacaste real estate during economic crises. Really, we first need to understand the absolute fundamental. Oh, I forgot to say also, Happy Juan Santa Maria Day, or Dia de Juan Santa Maria here in Costa Rica. April 11th is a big holiday here commemorating the day that a brave 19-year-old Costa Rican drummer boy sacrificed his own life to set fire to the base of operations for William Walker, who at the time was in Rivas trying to create a pro-slavery republic here in Central America. Thanks to the heroic efforts of Juan Santa Maria, other Costa Ricans, and Central Americans, William Walker was repelled. He left the area in 1857, tried again. In 1860, he came back with another load of mercenaries to try and establish that pro-slavery Central America Republic. The Hondurans caught him and ended his life, and thus ended the story of William Walker. So anyway, I also meant to mention April 11th, Juan Santa Maria Day. Que lo pasen muy bien si están aquí en Costa Rica. So let's get to our subject here. And first of all, what I really want to discuss more than anything is the fundamental difference between the US and Costa Rica real estate markets that's going to actually provide the main difference between how things happen in crises here in Costa Rica versus the United States or Canada. That fundamental difference is debt. And I just want to bring up debtclock.org as a way to express my point a little bit here. The United States of America has, I think it was $12 or $16 trillion of mortgage debt. The mortgage industry in the US obviously is fundamental to how real estate works. And in Costa Rica, not only is this a cash market for foreigners, but in general, lending and debt, lending happens to a far lesser degree than it does in the United States. Far fewer Costa Ricans and very few foreigners who are here own that property through debt. And it's difficult to express the complete fundamental difference that means. In the US, basically, home ownership is tied to everyone being able to make those monthly mortgage payments. And obviously, when you add $12 trillion of debt to a system, that's $12 trillion in extra buying capacity that blows up demand for property. You've got people with very average income who own extraordinary homes thanks to that debt. Now, when the price of that debt changes, when interest rates go up, or when the economic situation related to that debt changes significantly, for example, when you get 2 or 3% of those mortgage holders who lose their jobs, you immediately have a much more wild fluctuation in what people are able and willing to pay for homes, or rather, really what banks are willing to pay for homes, because there's so much debt tied to things. And that's why you have the absolutely extraordinary swings in the US market where, in 2009, you had $1 million homes that couldn't be sold at any price. Whereas here in Costa Rica, the fundamentals are absolutely different in that the pressure of debt doesn't apply to most of the people who own or really want to acquire property here. Because of that lack of debt, whenever the global economic situation here changes, there's not just as drastic of a change in what people can pay for their properties. And really, it's not as drastic because you didn't have an absolutely overinflated demand to begin with. So if your demand is only slightly above what the physical purchasing power of the human beings is, when we have a crash here in Costa Rica, suddenly your demand only goes down slightly, or rather, you don't have quite that enormous fall that can happen with a change in unemployment up in the US. It's interesting that we're talking that right now in Costa Rica, you've seen a lot of similar trends that were happening back in 2006 and 7. And specifically in Guanacaste, you've seen this surge of new development, of projects that had stagnated previously that are now coming, being picked up and put onto the market. Basically, people are developing or offering inventory as fast as they can because they've been seeing the surge that Costa Rica had post-pandemic. Right now, you've got a lot of new communities opening their gates and putting up those for sale signs. Those communities and developers are going to be affected differently than the individuals who own property or who actually want to buy it. Let's talk about what actually happens in Guanacaste. I want to talk, so from the perspective of individual buyers, the amount of people who actually come down and purchase property, yes, you do see a significant decline in demand. This is a luxury item. People are buying properties here in Guanacaste as, a satisfaction of emotion or a lifelong goal that they wanted to achieve. And it's really not 100% necessary in most cases. By the way, Ultimate Island Escapes wanted to say I'd be more than happy to meet up with you this Sunday. Absolutely. Send me an email, once again, to matt@costaricamatt.com. I'll be more than happy to set up an appointment with you next week. By the way, if anyone else out there has questions, comments, concerns, don't hesitate to post them in the chat. So in Guanacaste during an economic crisis, whereas in overinflated neighborhoods in the US, you can see housing prices utterly plummet from one day to the next. You typically don't see that here in Guanacaste due to cash ownership of those properties. Owners are not desperately, needing to get out from under their property due to the lack of debt. And a lot of the foreigners who own their properties here also generate income to cover those expenses or to cover the operating expenses of a property. So the property is not costing them any money to begin with, compared to a situation in the US where, a lot of homeowners are living paycheck to paycheck, and a huge percentage of their paycheck is dedicated to their mortgage payment. So immediately that pressure hits, they lose their job, maybe their income is affected, and suddenly you've got people who have to get out from under their properties. The foreigners who own property in Guanacaste, because they own it outright in cash and because they're generally generating income to cover their expenses, do not feel that pressure. And the response that you'll see in real estate prices in Guanacaste is always going to be much slower and less immediate and dramatic than what can happen in economic crises in the US and Canada. Really, you tend to see a lot of the foreigners who are sellers cross their arms and say, I'm going to wait out this crisis. I love my house. I've invested a ton. I've made it my own. In many cases, they were the ones who built it and designed it. And that combination of pride plus the lack of urgency in getting out from under debt means that they're just going to wait out the market until they eventually get their price. Now, let's talk about one of the bigger impacts that you see in terms of developers in Guanacaste. So whereas your typical individual seller has zero pressure in most circumstances, developers, on the other hand, usually have an entire business model that is time sensitive. They've launched their investment. They've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars into the property up until this point. They have huge ongoing costs to keep up their development, and developers are the ones that really start to feel the pressure. And honestly, in many cases, developers in Guanacaste, Costa Rica, do not have the same kind of cash flow that developers do in the United States. Frankly, I've met dozens and dozens of developers or hopeful developers over the years here in Costa Rica. And to be honest, the vast majority of them are in what I'd call a relatively shoestring budget when it comes to their cash flow. If something goes wrong with their project, or if they don't make sales soon enough, then they start to see problems in their budget and their business model. And developers can really be the ones who suffer in these economic crises and who are the first ones really to change their prices or change their entire strategy. Currently, you are seeing in Guanacaste that the tapering off of demand that we've already seen over 24 and going into 2025 has changed the strategy for a lot of developers, where even in our area, I can name 3 different new developments where the developer originally was only offering full homes, completed packages as their product. Obviously, they were doing that to make the highest profit margin. They wanted to develop a completely cohesive neighborhood with only their designs. Those developers have now all started offering undeveloped lots as what they're going to sell to people as a strategy to try and get things moving in their developments. You've seen some of that in Tamarindo. You've seen some of that in Avellanas, on and on. Developers are starting to look for ways to move that cash flow forward and really get things going with their project so that they don't run the risk of total stagnation. More than anything, what you will see as the biggest effect of an economic crisis in Guanacaste, really there are two things. First, the accumulation of inventory, because we've got that dynamic where sellers aren't going to rush to reduce their prices. They're not desperate and they love their home, so they're willing to sit on the market. And as that demand falters, you just start to see listings pile up. We have certainly started to see an accumulation of inventory in our market. In a week or so, I'm going to do a video with my colleague Camille addressing one of those specific inventory buildups in a gated community to the north of us. The second effect that you will see from that in the economic crisis here, really that's going to be most noticeable in Guanacaste, will be those developments that first stagnate and eventually become one of those overgrown, unkempt entrances that people see still today, so many of from the 2009 and 10 financial crash. In 2008, there were countless new developments that had just started in Guanacaste. From 2000 until 2008, you basically had an insane boom in the real estate industry and people were rushing to get in. I had one friend at the time right before 2009 who would have people depositing money into his account without telling him in advance. Like deposits would show up and then he'd get a call saying, hey, go find me some land, start flipping it as soon as possible. And at that point, you had an absolute frenzy, a bubble, a lot of people who were caught holding the bag when finally things collapsed in 2009, ended up with property that became a stagnant and eventually abandoned idea. Up in the hills in our area, it's amazing. Even where I was in Peace Corps, which is a tiny 300-person village, 7 miles away from a highway and really 20 miles away from anything big, even there, I had a failed development in my little Peace Corps site. There was a gate, a guardhouse, and nothing but forest behind it. It was really spooky. There was even another one further up into the mountains where the optimism had been so much about the development. People had gone to an absolutely remote location and started a big project, that honestly at a place that takes an hour and a half, really good 4x4 vehicle, etc., to get to. Once again, at this moment, we've seen a lot of new developments offered, and what we're going to see going forward is that time will tell which developers have the cash flow to be able to get through these stagnant sales or really this slow period where people are worried about the economy and to come out on the other side. Now, obviously, this time, if we are entering into some kind of crisis or recession or whatever, or rather when it happens the next time, because yes, it is inevitable, it will be very different than 2009, obviously. Right now, I think that there are emotional drivers that are pushing people from the United States and Canada to purchase property in Costa Rica. Those emotional drivers will work to motivate people to buy here despite a recession or major crisis. Obviously, we would hope that there will not be a financial meltdown to the scale of 2009, and so you may not see quite a dramatic cutoff. But certainly, one of the things that I've been emphasizing in my team in preparing for any inevitable economic changes is that people buy things using emotions, and then they justify their purchase rationally after they've done it. Right now, there's a lot of fear creeping into people's psyche, and you've definitely already had throughout Costa Rica signs that the fear and that concern for future economic conditions is overriding the other emotions that they have that really, their desire to spend time at the beach with their family, to create those memories that they wanted to. In these moments of crisis, it's really, to me, a case-by-case basis, working with different people as to whether that possible negative future outweighs the possible positive benefits in the near term. And what I love to do with people is take an honest look at whether or not it's right for them. Right now, with the economy doing what it's doing, there are a lot of people out there who absolutely should back off the idea of buying in Costa Rica. And in fact, if you're of the opinion that the economy is about to have a major hiccup or we're about to enter into a recession, my biggest advice out there would be, first of all, to be very patient. Second, to start developing your knowledge of Guanacaste so that you understand where you want to be and where you want to try and circle for properties. And third, I think that if you can be flexible on the community or location that you want to be in, you will start to see opportunities emerging as a buyer as different people and especially developers become more motivated. I would not advise people to start sending out fire sale price offers to different sellers, because right now you're going to get pretty much 100% no's in response. As things progress along, however, it becomes more worthwhile to go fishing with those low offers, and you might find people out there who have been directly affected in the United States or Canada by what's happening in the economy, and liquidating their Costa Rica property has actually become a priority. Again, they're not going to be the majority. You've got mainly people who own their properties outright, and really a lot of people who can ride out times of financial difficulty, because if they own a luxury property or a property in Costa Rica as their vacation home, typically their financial portfolio was doing pretty well, and a small hiccup isn't going to change their attitude. But if you're out there and thinking that there may be a big hiccup coming, start looking around and figuring out where you might want to be, the community that appeals to you. And as things stagnate, if you do see that accumulation of inventory, you're going to notice where the developers have not been able to make their sales goals. And specifically, I would even think about, if you want to be in a particular community, you should make regular contact with the developers' sales programs. Ask them what's available, what's recently sold, etc. And you'll start to find those places where, this developer hasn't had a closing in 6 months, and perhaps they're really interested in offering a huge discount to somebody who still has cash. So you can sit, wait, evaluate how things are going, and potentially score much cheaper properties as developers start to feel the pain and really see their cash flow affected. Again, I do not personally have an opinion as to whether or not we're headed to a recession or any kind of crisis. I only wanted to talk about what happens in Guanacaste when this happens. I should have prefaced everything mentioning, I moved here in 2008. At the time, it was perfect because I was a Peace Corps volunteer and I had no connection to the real estate industry. It was very easy for me to get my monthly stipend and sort of ignore what was happening from 2008 through 2010. But I was here and I could see just how many projects immediately closed their doors because the developers at that time were almost 100%, many of them were dependent on those first few sales happening quickly in order to fund either their debt repayments or whatever they had invested into the project. And in 2009 and 10, you saw lots of projects stop immediately, a ton of people laid off in the construction industry, and things just immediately stagnate in that way. I wanted to mention, I forgot to do this, I love supporting local businesses. One of the local businesses that does an amazing job for my wife and I is an upholstery cleaner that I want to feature here today. Just to give you an idea, if you're in our area and looking for this service, here's a quick local business ad. Playa Tamarindo area and looking for an expert to handle your upholstery cleaning. Jean Carlos has done an absolutely wonderful job for us here at our house for years. He has his own business. He comes to you with everything he needs to work. Jean Carlos is pristine clean. We're gonna put his phone number here at the bottom of the page. Muchísimas gracias por el buen trabajo siempre. Ahí tiene el número para llamar a Jean Carlos para cualquier servicio de limpieza de upholstery. I clearly don't know the word for upholstery in Spanish. It's something that I didn't pick up in my Peace Corps town. We had a great question from Computer 1753. How healthy is the Numandi Development Project? This is in Avellanas, and for those of you who don't know, Numandi is offering tree-hugging homes. I think they're 3, 4, and 5 bedrooms, starting at a price range of the 800s. It's a very great question. I am not the sales representative for Numandi. And yes, you can see that right now they've got their gate. They do actually have 2 or 3 different model homes that they've built inside the project. I do not know how healthy that project is in terms of the initial sales. I can say from a third party, I would definitely estimate that the developers have a significant significant resources, simply because the beginning of the project, they invested a ton in a perimeter wall. They built a huge gatehouse, and now these model homes are in. So really, from the outside, one can see that the developers had significant capacity. To be honest, Numandi is exactly one of the projects where I would routinely email and perhaps see how their sales are going. Right now, they only launched their sales in earnest, I think 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. And so I would say it's still too early to tell. But as we go forward 6, 12, 18 months into the future, that is one of many projects where if I were a buyer, I would just start to keep an eye on the inventory and, see whether or not they're able to achieve those sales. And further down the line, if they haven't made them, perhaps look at getting a really good deal. For now, though, the homes look really cool. They are doing, the tree-hugging homes are modular. It's definitely a different concept than what you're typically seeing in Guanacaste. And again, not being the listing representative for them, I couldn't actually tell you exactly how their sales are going, but among the many projects that are worth monitoring as we move forward into these uncertain economic times, I would put Numandi and the other Avellanas developments in that category as potentially opening up discounts if they aren't able to make sales. Well, I'll go back specifically to Numandi. I also see that they have a very impressive marketing program, and that can distinguish a lot of separate the winners and losers in the developments here in Guanacaste. They've been able to really get the word out there. The online and in-country marketing is enormous there. And really, I would say that if anybody's going to be able to generate sales, those projects with a ton of marketing are the ones that are going to be able to get across the finish line. If you want my assistance in tracking Numandi and other projects, I'd be more than happy to do so. Again, my email address is matt@costaricamatt.com. Burke, thanks very much for joining as well. Ana Isabel Morales, lo siento que no le había respondido anteriormente. Muchísimas gracias por mirar la emisión también. Thanks everybody for watching today. It's 12:35 and time to sign off. I'll see you next Friday. Have a great weekend. Again, Feliz Dia de Juan Santa Maria. Pura vida, and I look forward to seeing you next time.